up? It's Samuel, and in this video I'd like to talk to you about Henri Cartier-Bresson and what we can learn from him in regards to photography. I've been studying Henri Cartier-Bresson for a few months now, really sort of doing some research on his life, on his philosophy towards photography and life itself, and also really looking and paying attention to his work and seeing what's the best sort of lessons that we can extract from his work and from his overall philosophy towards photography. First lesson is not to overshoot, okay? And this is a bit counterintuitive, especially in this day and age, because we got digital cameras. And back in the day, in the 30s and 40s, when Cartier-Bresson was shooting, obviously he didn't have the luxury of shooting 100 frames of one scene, right? Because back then you only had film cameras, and film would of course cost money, unlike digital frames these days, which are for free. If you're anything like me, usually what happens is when I'm at a scene and I find something that I really want to capture, my camera sort of turns into a machine gun and I'm just spraying photos left, right, and center. And in some cases, this is a good thing if you know what you're doing, but most of the time we overshoot because we are scared that we're going to miss the right moment, that we're not going to capture the moment unless we are taking frames every millisecond.
But you shouldn't overshoot. It's like overeating, overdrinking. You have to eat, you have to drink, but over is too much. Because by the time you press, you arm the shutter once more and maybe the picture was in between. It's a fraction of a second. It's an instinct.
So Henri Cartier-Bresson, he coined this term called the decisive moment. Essentially what it meant was he believed that in every moment there is a precise point in time in which the whole scene becomes or gets encapsulated perfectly. So every scene has that one moment, that decisive moment that as photographers our job is to capture. And instead of worrying about I'm gonna miss the shot, so I better take 1 million frames of this one scene. Instead of worrying about that, we should really be paying attention to the moment and noticing when that decisive moment happens. And once it happens, that's when we press the shutter. This, of course, doesn't always apply. Sometimes you want to take more photos, sometimes you want to take more frames, but in general, it's good to shoot less and just pay attention to the moment. The second tip that I learned from Cartier-Bresson is not to overthink either. Okay, and this is kind of swinging the pendulum in the opposite direction, because on the one hand, if we don't overshoot, what I experienced from stopping that excessive shooting is I actually started to swing a bit too far into my mind, and I started to overthink things a bit too much. And I noticed when I did that, I actually ended up with even less good photos, because I would just be way too perfectionistic about when I'm gonna take that photo. And so you gotta be careful not to get into your head too much, because at the end of the day, photography, just like any other art form, is really based on something that goes beyond the mind. It both includes and transcends the mind. And really, if we want to be great photographers, we really need to be paying attention to our feelings and our intuition. And it tends to be quite difficult to do that when we're very stuck in our minds. And the last tip I have for you that I've learned from Cartier-Bresson has been, and this is kind of a meta lesson that I learned because I was studying sort of what Cartier-Bresson did on his free time when he was not out shooting. And I discovered that he actually studied a lot. He read a lot of books, and he was really interested in different philosophies and different art forms outside of photography. So he wasn't just completely obsessed with one thing. He was sort of looking at many different perspectives. And I guess what I learned from that is that we really want to be paying attention to what we're putting inside our minds. It's very easy to just focus on the photography and then forget that really whatever it is we're creating, that art that we produce, it comes from the things that we put into our minds. That content, that information that we're putting in daily, whether it's through Instagram, looking at Instagram, or looking at or TikTok or YouTube, or talking to our friends and colleagues and so forth, it's that stuff which then gets put into our subconscious mind and then which gets projected into our work. So a good way of sort of telling the quality and the depth of our own work is to check what kind of work are we putting into our minds? What kind of art are we ingesting? What kind of information are we taking in and reading and looking up and researching and so forth? The higher quality the information we put into our minds, the better quality our work tends to be. And that about wraps up this video. I highly recommend you go check out Henri Cartier-Bresson's work if you haven't already. I mean, he's essentially the grandfather of candid street photography, so he's really worth looking up if you haven't checked his work. I'm sure you've heard his name if you have any idea about photography, but you may have not actually delved into his work. He's a really interesting guy, and he's got work that just, it's timeless. You can look at it today and think, whoa, like that was produced in the 30s and 40s and it still holds deep value inside of it. So highly recommend you check it out, and that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.